Welcome back to CVM Live. It's now time for the major stories in detail. Chief Justice Brian Sykes says the judiciary must be strident in asserting its commitment to the motto of the court by fostering timely delivery of high standards of justice for all. This he says at the launch of the customer service centers for parish courts earlier this morning. CVM Live's Khadija Thomas has the report.
The Chief Justice says there must be commitment to standards that are known, objective and measurable in delivering service to those who use the courts. He says the judiciary is committed to publishing these standards and declaring themselves when they fall short of what is required.
And where we do, we must acknowledge that we have fallen short of the glory and commit to moving forward to meet those standards. We also welcome feedback given to us by members of the public.
Justice Sykes notes that all parish courts must embrace the manner of service delivery as well as the judgments that are passed. He says the law, procedure and manner in which it is given is of importance.
The parish court judges and the senior parish court judges will be required to become aware of the contents of the customer service charter and the time standards that have been stated there. For example, a 7-day response time to written communication. The phone should be answered within or not more than 3 rings.
Justice Sykes maintains that the public has a right to expect improved performance with the judiciary as judges examine their workflow to meet this expectation.
The public has really no concern with our internal issues, and rightly so. When we go to other places for public service, it matters not to us whether the public service provider with whom we have to deal with had a good day or a bad night. What we want is a high quality of service delivered in an acceptable time frame and in a manner, the manner is important, that is acceptable to us.
Khadija Thomas, CVM Live.
The Minister of Health, Dr. Christopher Tufton, and opposition spokesman on health, Dr. Dayton Campbell, continued their debate surrounding the toxic fumes that forced the closure of the Cornwall Regional Hospital and the Ministry of Health's role in protecting the health of workers and patients. CVM Live's Joel Croskill reports.
Contradictions and insinuations were a part of the ongoing debate surrounding the actions that were taken by the Ministry of Health in relation to the Cornwall Regional Hospital, which suffered from toxic fumes that would eventually lead to its evacuation. Opposition spokesperson on health, Dr. Dayton Campbell, suggested that mold was not the only contaminant in the airways of the hospital, according to reports.
Sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde gas, hydrogen sulfide, ethyl chlorine, acetaldehyde, acetic acid, xylene, asbestos,
All killers.
fiberglass, all of these were clearly listed in the report that came from the University of Technology, done by the group from the university, including a toxicologist, Dr. Alverston Bailey. And a copy of said report was also given to the Minister of Health. So when the answer to the question says that only mold, we know that that is not true.
Dr. Christopher Tufton, the Minister of Health, took umbrage at the suggestion that procedures were not in place to track the health effects on staff and patients at the institution who may have been exposed to toxicants.
The member, unfortunately, is insinuating that adequate care is not being taken to address any possible concerns raised by the staff. And I would dare say he does not have an authority on that issue, Mr. Speaker, and in terms of the concerns. The questions go on to, the answers to the question go on to suggest that a study has been commissioned that will seek to assess each worker at Cornwall Regional coming out of the concerns that have been raised by some of the workers And that we will elaborate on in more specific detail. We're working out the terms of reference for that study.
Dr. Campbell also questioned the method by which the PAHO report determined that mold had consumed the facility, noting that they conducted a visual inspection. Joel Crosskill, CVM Live.
Outgoing chairman of the Jamaica Police Federation, Sergeant Cecil McCullough, did not mince his words when he demanded changes be made in the Jamaica Constabulary Force and the Security Ministry. The sergeant called for appropriate laws to be passed for police officers to perform effectively. CVM Live's Khadija Thomas again with this report.
Just to inform the minister, you can't run champion organization from Bagdoo's budget.
The sergeant's statement was met with support from members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force in attendance, as he reminded officers to confidently demand that they be provided with adequate resources to fight crime and violence.
Members, my charge to you when you go back and meet with your members, the first meeting when you reach your destination on Friday is to convey to them how grateful we are for us as an organization to be operating with a 19th century infrastructure fighting 21st century crime.
The sergeant called for police officers to be treated with dignity and respect, stating there ought to be a change in the dynamics of the police force and federation.
The watershed moment to which I speak of or spoke of also will be saying that no more, Minister, our rank and file members will not work in excess of the hours prescribed without being properly compensated. Slavery done. And while to go beyond the 50 hours, there must be an overtime regime that properly captures your hours, and you must be compensated.
Meanwhile, the Security Minister, Horace Chang, noted that there are many issues within the security force that needs to be dealt with in handling the modern law enforcement agency.
And going forward, one of the things I hope to have is the kind of open dialogue and frankness that is required to ensure that whatever we do in taking the police forward is something that all stakeholders are committed to and are bought into.
Khadija Thomas, CVM Live.
Thanks, Khadija. The Houses of Parliament design competition was officially launched by Prime Minister Andrew Holness, who shared his vision for the development of a modern symbol of Jamaica's democracy. Here's Joel Crosskill with the report.
Jamaica has not had a purpose-built, designed parliament building in 52 years of its political independence.
Prime Minister Andrew Holness seized the opportunity to expound on a vision during the official launch of the Houses of Parliament design competition managed by the Urban Development Corporation.
Investing in a parliament is not wasting the people's money. It is because we have not as a country made the investments in the symbols of our sovereignty, why we have the fundamental issues with respect for the rule of law and fairness and dignity of the state.
The Prime Minister shared why Gordon House is proving inadequate to accommodate the functions of a bicameral system.
The fact is that Gordon House was always a temporary House of Parliament. Aside from the issue of insufficient space, lack of adequate parking, and facilities to interact and engage with the public, the building itself lacks the stature and functionality of a modern parliament.
It's not just the Parliament building that will be coming in for redevelopment either, according to the Prime Minister.
We will have 14 government ministries and core agencies conveniently and efficiently located within the 300 acres of surrounding land. This is about 52 acres of land, but the development plan outside of the Parliament calls for the redevelopment of 300 acres surrounding this property. We will have our ministries, agencies, all centrally located. Can you imagine the efficiency of that when we purposely plan and build for an efficient government?
Joel Crosskill, CVM Live.
Police officers were alerted to the Spanish Town bus park earlier this morning after protesters blocked a section of the park and placed padlocks on the gate. Here's Khadija Thomas again with this report.
Store operators and vendors were unable to open their businesses on Thursday morning when they arrived to find that the bus terminus had been closed.
We are asking for the owner Island Homes to come and address us and tell us what is the reason why they close up all the gates. We don't know, because last week Tuesday police came and said we can't put out nothing on Thursday. They're going everywhere going to lock up. And we don't know why. They not even write the store owner a letter and say, due to what, they're going to lock. Nobody tell us nothing.
She says calls were made and there was no response. But according to the police, information was received that the park had been closed off by protesters. Superintendent Ransford Hardy says the action of the protesters was wrong, as numerous entrances and exits creates an accessible point for criminals. He says several shootings and murders in the old capital is evidence.
So a meeting was convened, and that was a consensus for us to reduce the number of access and exit points to the park. And that's why the management responded.
The superintendent notes that the police force will not allow lawlessness to spread in the capital and maintains that they will carry out their mandate as law enforcers.
The bus drivers are not a problem, you know. We are here to enforce the law where that is concerned, and we enforce traffic in Spanish Town. But what they want is a system that is convenient to them where they can do just about anything. It is not going to work.
The police now removing slabs of board and maintaining their presence in the capital until the padlock was removed, much to the delight of vendors. Khadija Thomas, CVM Live.
Having been bolstered with the supply of new equipment courtesy of the U.S. government, the capacity of Jamaica's Marine Police has been improved. We spoke with the commanding officer of the Marine Division to get an update on the actions of the unit and its role in preventing contraband and illegal activities. CVM Live's Joel Croskill reports.
From the perspective of the Marine Police, border security is priority number one, and few take that responsibility more seriously than Commanding Officer for the Marine Division, Superintendent Rex Swearing, who provided an update on the operations of the unit.
We know that in Jamaica, the weapon, the firearm, is responsible for more than 80% of the murders, crime in Jamaica. Marine role in this fight is to ensure that we limit the amount of weapons that are that comes to shore. As part of this process, we have 11 outposts.
That task is made more difficult by the geography of the island.
As it is the last count we got from our intel partners, is that there are over 150 unmanned ports in Jamaica. And unmanned ports mean ports that are not manned with officials, that people can enter the country. We have strategically placed our patrols to ensure that within our space, persons are not able easily to come into our country with anything that is illegal.
In addition to preventing persons and weaponry from entering Jamaica's borders, the Marine Police also keep a close watch on what fisherfolk are doing during particular seasons.
That we are in a close season for lobsters. This season started from the 1st of April and will end on the 31st of June. By now, all lobsters that are in the possession of anyone should have been disposed of, and persons who are found with lobsters at this time are exposing themselves to be prosecuted.
The superintendent also provided an update on the situation regarding Haitian nationals who attempt to breach our borders, noting that none have been caught trying to do so in recent times. Joel Croskill, CVM Live.
Time now for regional and international news.
Making the top regional and international news this evening, a special reserve constable assigned to the Foot Patrol unit at the Chaguanas police station was detained at the Gatwick airport in London on Monday after he was found with a kilogram of pure cocaine. The officer, who has about 10 years service, did not apply for leave to travel out of the country. And London investigators are now working with local Interpol officers to find out whether he was involved in trafficking cocaine into the United Kingdom. Now, several teachers of a
You're back with your News Authority, your 90-minute news program. Thank you so much for staying with CVM live on CVM television. We have a good panel for you. Continuous mixed views about the performance of the present administration over 2 years in office. Is there hope given the present state of the economy? But all of this is going on and happening in the context of a crime crisis, with the opposition relentless in its position. Give us a crime plan. But our panel this evening is going to take us all the way there. The JLP, crime and the economy. We welcome from the Jamaica Labour Party government consultant and friend, Marlon Morgan, and from the opposition, People's National Party, our friend as well, Venetia Phillips, councillor for the Papine Division and MP caretaker. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us. So let's get right into it, guys. So the JLP, crime, the economy. So nobody can argue that the economic performance is not a success. It speaks for itself. And objectively speaking, this is due to bipartisan efforts from Dr. Peter Phillips passing the baton to former Minister of Finance Audley Shaw, and now to Dr. Nigel Clark. So that speaks for itself. We're about to tell the IMF bye-bye. But the crime crisis, state of emergency, a band-aid for crime, some people say, a common tool to fight crime. What are we saying? Rate the government, crime,
Well,
economy.
a number of those issues are moot points, but I trust and I think that in terms of any objective assessment and objective analysis, one would have to concur that the wholeness-led administration has been acquitting itself well in respect of its management of the economy. Yes, a lot of heavy lifting went on in a previous dispensation in terms of the pursuit of an IMF program after the previous one from 2010 went off tracks for some reasons we may not get into tonight or have the time to venture into tonight. But suffice it to say, growth is eluding us in respect of some of the downside risks that continue to confront Jamaica, not the least of which would be some of the issues confronting agriculture. Drought is at one end of the spectrum, and as well as torrential downpours at the other end of the spectrum, which has a debilitating effect on domestic production. And that's an area where attention really is being focused. We have a newly minted Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries Minister sending the right signals to market in terms of support for farmers and continued build out of supporting infrastructure for agriculture, because we need to get growth in addition to the infrastructure work that we're doing and some of the other creditable performances on the economy side.
Okay, so you've given a rating of?
Well, my rating is in the order of 7.5 on 10. It would have been an 8 were it not for the, shall we say, sluggish growth.
Are you factoring in crime?
Well, and it is the crime that causes it to be a B+, because I mean something in the order of 7.5 on 10 is in the range of a B+. 8 out of 10 would have been in the realm of an A. But the truth is we're still grappling with crime. But we'll get to that in a subsequent response.
Okay, Venetia, what are we going to get to know? What is the rebuttal? Is there a rebuttal?
Isn't it refreshing, though, to hear Marlon at least accept that the framework was actually set by the People's National Party administration in terms of the heavy lifting, as he called it. The tough decisions were actually taken. If I were to start with the rating, Marlon would have gone for 4 out of 10, and here is why. I believe that, no. You
4 out of 10 is a pass at
yeah,
you,
no,
you know. And you is a space which you're very familiar.
I mean, I would have gone for 4 out of 10, simply because I believe that we could have been much further along if expediency was not necessarily what was characterizing this government. I think there is too much emphasis being placed on hanging on to power, more than to take those decisions that would bring some kind of sustainability to our system.
What do you mean, hanging on to power?
It is because if you look at just how the government is operating, they're always on the defensive, you know, in terms of everything. And so they do not allow the space for the kind of dialogue and discussion, whether it is from the opposition or even the private sector, or even sometimes suggestions coming from the media as to, you know, some of those things that we could do differently to move things along. Marlon spoke to the whole issue of growth. I remember the excitement in 2016, I think it was April, if I stand correct, yes, where the Economic Growth Council was put together, was established in 2016. And I remember the Prime Minister speaking to just how excited he was about that. Of course, probably were it not for the fact that brand name Mr. Lee Chain attached to that for the JLP accounts for the expedient position of that. We did the whole, announcement of the 5 and 4, 5% growth in 4 years. We knew it was overly ambitious. We have been, for the most part, Marlon, and the Prime Minister said it himself, been maintaining a discipline that started under the PNP in terms of our fiscal responsibility. And so you find that we are doing some things.
But what would you have done differently? What would you, as the PNP representative, what should the PNP have done differently if they were holding the reins of power?
Okay, so I believe that certainly there are some things that even the IMF pointed out, that the IMF regarded them as structural obstacles to our growth process. Chief among them was crime. I believe that both administrations have paid lip service in the main to the whole crime situation in Jamaica, not taking seriously enough, I believe, the impact on our economy and its effect on our growth. Marlon mentioned, of course, agriculture. We deal with issues.
Let's don't get to Marlon, but quick, what would you want to see in a crime plan? I actually opened with.
Oh, you're gone with the crime plan, because I was about to list some stuff that the bureaucracies. So you have crime, for example, the bureaucratic process that is just really, really dogging the show for the government at the moment. We're also talking about the skill. The labor skills deficit that we don't have. You're talking about poor access to financing on the part of our people. We talk about these things, but we have not really moved to address them in a real way. And these are some of the things that are affecting growth in the country at this time.
We do seem to talk a lot. It's many persons' opinion that we talk a lot as a country. We like pass, we like lavish, we like to boast. We talk a lot. We were promised a crime plan by this government. Even on this program where the government representatives say that 2 things were coming, a crime plan and job descriptions. That date has long passed. What's going on?
Well, as the Prime Minister would have indicated elsewhere, and he did so in the Parliament recently, the government does have a crime plan in place. The truth of the matter is the government does not want for the whole situation involving a crime plan and so on to become a source of discord, but more so an opportunity for consensus across the aisle, because it's important for both sides, the parliamentary opposition and government, to be singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of some of the critical deliverables. There has been tremendous support to the security forces. It was just yesterday, all of us as law-abiding and well-thinking Jamaicans would have felt proud when we heard of the police's nabbing of persons involved in the Dexter Street gang, aka the Middle East gang over there in Westmoreland.
I want specifically from you, I hear about these things that you say, but specifically, what would the People's National Party want to see in a crime plan?
In addition to outlaying for public consumption, because you have to remember that when you're outlaying a crime plan, it's actually a framework that you're setting so that is measurable for us as Jamaicans to understand, so we can know what our role is. Because the crime plan is not just for the security forces, it's for the people of Jamaica, because we have a role to play. And so that framework has to be laid out in a way that the average person, the average man in the street, is able to understand what their responsibility is. So that also has to be supplemented by the resources to the security forces strategically.
Give me an example.
We talk about resources. For example, both administrations will talk about cars that they give to the police. But as one who stays close to the police, I always wonder, who is advising the government on either side? Because if you're going to give them a Toyota Corolla to, for example, go into the hills of St. Andrew.
Are we falling into the talk trap that Ashley just mentioned?
But no, is it a talk trap really?
No, what are the
you have to make
specifics.
sure that you are giving them relevant resources to be able to fight. Technology also has to be a critical part of crime fighting. We're not serious as a country until do the legislative framework in order to be able to put in cameras. It happens in the UK, it happens in the US. We have some cameras, at different points. No, let's talk about Jamaica Eye. I wanted to talk about that the last time we were here. Now, the hypocrisy in Jamaica Eye, remember that this is a discussion that has been coming since the PNP's administration, and it is now built out and is being rolled out under the JLP, except that you are not explaining to the people properly that this, one, it's optional, 2, you're asking the citizens to connect to the software, right? There's the question that is being asked, reasonable so, about privacy. The legislative framework in terms of the evidence act being amended to make sure that these things will have value.
I'm hearing the criticisms, Venetia, but I'm not
Marlon.
hearing from you. But before but
the answer is in the criticism that you have to put in the legislative framework. You have to give them the resources.
To get something specific, because one cannot get perhaps that which doesn't exist.
No.
But the key observation is that the government does have a broad framework. You would have heard the former National Security Minister and, of course, the administration as a whole speaking of the 5-pillar crime strategy, not the least of which would be safety and security, trying to reduce reoffending, you know, the whole business of recidivism amongst persons who would have been in our penal system prior, situation prevention, the whole business of, for example, preventative detention and having domestic violence coordinators at a number of police stations across the island. The idea is that resources are being channeled into strategic areas to nab the flow of guns coming into Jamaica. You would have heard of the interception of 19 guns some months ago, which were destined and intended for the Middle East gang, the Dexter Street gang over in Westmoreland. Those guns would have gone on to take lives. And it is the investment in our investigative capabilities and, of course, our borders. Yeah, that would have helped the police.
Part of that crime plan you asked for, though, which Marlon refuses to tell you, is the legislation that supports. Because guess what? You have to understand, you know, that enforcement has to be supported by the legislative framework. And so, one, we had brought in the anti-gang legislation. Two, the anti-lotto scam laws that helped us to deal with that. The reality is that we need to go further even with the anti-gang. We heard the DPP just this week. Who told us what is missing. What is the government doing about that? We have heard nothing.
But is the PNP championing that? I mean, is the PNP being effective in opposition within the context of the crime crisis?
An argument could be made there, Ashley, in terms of, you know, basically the force with which the People's National Party should be able to deal with issues like this, because you've already laid the framework, and yes, we have identified, you know, a weakness or a flaw in the thing. Let's move now to, you know, to advocate for that to be rectified, so that at least it can be effective. We can talk about all the stuff. These are the things that you're mentioning, man, and were already in place. I mentioned when I was here last that they had the counter-terrorism gang structure coming out of Mobile Reserve. They had the Area 4 team, which was there, very effective under George Coelho. And the reality is that there is nothing substantial in terms of a framework coming out of your government that says to us, we have a platform that we took from the People's National Party that we know.
I mean, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm still not.
So let's start at first instance. Let's address the deficit in the anti-gang. No, I agree. He's a little two-faced. Let's move the conversation.
What the he who goes in search of that which does not exist.
I was Marlon there.
Marlon, you're taking
to bring you into the conversation. There is a view, and we've heard the view on this panel several times in this segment of the show, that we don't really need a crime plan at all. Actually, it is more of the
the Prime Minister hit that nail on the head, and quite rightly so. In terms of where the preoccupation is, for us as an administration, effectively, we are past the whole notion of planning and just sitting and talking and whatnot. We are at implementation stage where rubber hits the road. The truth of the matter is, Venetia, the developments, the positive developments on the national security or the crime management front did not just happen by chance. It is as a result of the moral boost.
No, the PNP gave you a framework. Hold on, the PNP gave you a framework. You have not done anything to advance that which you got.
But if I may,
so, hold on, even when we gave you the DNA, evidence act, with the legislation, what have you done so far? Because you have to remember that the change in the face of criminality is something that we have to deal with. And so we have to make sure our system remains relevant in order to combat crime. What is your government doing?
Sure. Allow me to enumerate.
So, Marlon, you're saying action, not a bag amount. So enunciate
straight action, not a bag amount. But let me enumerate. In respect of our investigative capabilities and our forensics laboratory, in excess of 500 million Jamaican dollars has been spent by this whole-led administration to better equip and outfit our forensics laboratory. In addition to ballistics vests and helmets that would have been given to the police. Remember, one police officer was struck in his ballistics vest by Bowser over in Anshore, Montego Bay, a few Saturdays ago. Were it not for the investment in equipment like those, we would have had our policemen and women on the front line.
Is that true, though, Marlon? By all accounts,
the vests were expired.
By all accounts, what we heard, we speak to the vest, but what we heard is that in that particular operation, the police ran out of ammunition. Is that so?
There was some talk about that.
Well, ordinarily on the beat, the police do not go out with inordinate firepower.
Was that the beat?
I was about to say,
Yeah?
was that an ordinary beat?
Do not go out.
Was that an ordinary beat?
Well, I'm not in the
But you said something I really want an opportunity to
But there's
address.
an important thing to mention, though, because Venetia keeps heartening to this whole business of a framework that was established. And
No, that should be established.
Every so often, you see the commentary and the narrative on social media about what was in the pipeline. The JLP is the WD-40 of Jamaica. We're about removing the clot and that which is clogging up the pipeline, because the pipeline seems to have been blocked up under the PNP. We are rolling out the prosperity, we are rolling out infrastructure work, bar none. You see a number of road repairs going on, and people welcome that.
You know what? You mentioned earlier.
So while the pipeline was clogged, we are removing all of the grit and grime from the crime, from the pipeline.
Earlier that you have spent over 500 million in, you know. Can I tell you something?
Enhance the forensics laboratory.
I can spend the Bank of Jamaica and probably the Bank of England. What I spend it on and how I spend it is what counts,
but
right?
You would agree that
because
forensics laboratory is important.
The reality is that there has been incremental steps in terms of some aspects of our security services. But Marlon, what needs to address the real problems we're facing in Jamaica is just not happening on the part of the JP. And your excuses, it is not about a crime plan, but you're not telling us what it is about.
I think we've exhausted that particular point.
What are you implementing if you don't have a
I just want to
plan?
get this question. The crime seems to have eluded both administrations.
The numbers don't
let me just finish. Jamaica has over 1,600 murders a year coming, and we have always had a very high violence, one of the highest in the world. What are both parties doing? Prime Minister Holness several years ago asked then Prime Minister Portia Simpson-Miller to walk with him in the garrison. Is this something that both parties are prepared to do to sever their links, or what people describe as their links, with organized crimes, with gangs, etc., that's supporting them?
Richie, that signal call and that overture came from a place of sincerity, and it came out of a recognition of how important it was, if even in a symbolic sense, to demonstrate that the political leadership in the country has consensus around a particular deliverable to deconstruct these notions, even psychologically, of zones of exclusion in the country.
We have to wrap right now. Venetia, your final 2 cents.
The People's National Party has been consistent in terms of dealing with crime. We are the ones who have